When President Obama announced Merrick Garland as his Supreme Court pick this week, you could almost hear the sighs of disappointment among many in the president's base for his choice of a judge perceived as moderate, even conservative on some issues, and for not appointing another first to the court, say the first black woman justice or the first Asian American. But the president is standing behind his pick.
When it comes to the Supreme Court, I've appointed 2 women, 1 Hispanic, and in each case, the good news is that I appointed the person who I absolutely thought was the best person for the job. In this case, Merrick Garland is the best person for the job.
And joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Kristen Clarke, who's the president of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, Christopher Kang, director of the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, and Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com. And Jason, I'm going to start with you because the president is making his case that, look, he's appointed 2 women, he's appointed 1 Hispanic justice. This is the person he thought was the best person for the job. I read your piece in The Root, my friend, and it seems that you slightly disagree.
Yes, I slightly disagree. Isn't it nice that President Obama is engaging in the same kind of tokenism that he's railed against in different parts of his administration? So you put 2 women on the court, so I guess now that's enough. I have had a huge problem with the entire way that President Obama has handled this. Number 1, I think, again, he has abdicated to the Republican Party. He's always trying to make friends with people who don't like him. Number 2, he's not playing to win. Look, this is your opportunity to change the Supreme Court for the next 25 years, and you go for the easiest, most milquetoast selection that you can find. And lastly, honestly, I think it's a smack in the face to African-American women, to Asian Americans, to the entire coalition of people who have allowed him to win them both. And he's basically telling them, I don't care about you because I'd rather try and make peace with the Republican Party, when he could have just appointed somebody to the bench.
And Kristen, the point is, and your former executive director, Barbara Arnwine, equally railed against this nomination. Ava Jones DeWeaver, who was another African-American woman civil rights activist, railed against this nomination. I've talked on Background with civil rights leaders who are extremely disappointed and made the specific point that black women who turned out at 72%, highest voter turnout of any group, black women who have the highest approval rating for this president, gave him 96% of their votes, that, the fact that he skipped over this demographic that's been so loyal to him really angered a lot of people, and specifically black women. How do you feel about it?
I think people are disappointed. And, the reality is that Merrick Garland does not contribute to the racial diversity or gender diversity of the U.S. Supreme Court. But I think it's important to look at this nomination in a broader context. And when we do that, we see that this has been a president who's been deeply committed to judicial diversity and deeply committed to the principle of placing more African Americans on federal district courts and federal circuit courts. Throughout his presidency, he's nominated more than 70 African Americans to serve on district courts and circuit courts across our country, including 15 to the circuit court, which is traditionally the pipeline to which Supreme Court nominees are plucked. So I think we have to look at the president's overall track record. And when we do that, we see that this is somebody who is deeply committed to judicial diversity. He gets it. Here he's fulfilled his constitutional obligation, which is to...
I'm sorry. Go on, finish.
Which is to place somebody in that vacant seat on the court. Every day that court stands at 8 members has grave implications for communities of color. They're hugely important cases before the court concerning voting rights, the meaning of one person, one vote, racial diversity in colleges and universities. We face a grave constitutional crisis every day that Supreme Court stands at 8 members.
Yeah. And Chris, I wanted to talk to you because, obviously diversity is not just a black-white issue. There was a very prominent name that was ostentatiously floated as a potential nominee, and that's Sri Srinivasan, who is Asian American. He would have been the first Asian American member of the court. And yes, those lower courts are important, Chris, but there's only one Supreme Court. It's sort of the ultimate compliment to pay to a jurist. How did you feel? Because I know that there was behind the scenes a great deal of lobbying by the Asian American legal community for Sri. How do you feel about the fact that he too was passed over?
Well, hi, Joy. Thanks so much for having me. Look, obviously, my first reaction when the president made his announcement was disappointment. I'd hoped that he would take the opportunity to place the first Asian American on the Supreme Court, and I think Judge Srinivasan would have been a fantastic choice. But that said, as I think back to the days leading up to the president's announcement, I've actually been really proud of where our community is in that Judge Srinivasan was interviewed by the president. And this is the first time that an Asian American has ever been considered by the president, by any president, in this sort of final round of consideration. And I take a step back and think about why that's happened, and it's because President Obama has appointed more Asian American and Pacific Islander federal judges than all presidents in history combined. The same is true for openly gay and lesbian judges. He's also appointed more African American, more Hispanic, more women judges than any other president. And so, look, it's really tough to miss out on this one slot, the biggest slot of all. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it's clear that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and, you know, I'll come back to you on that, Jason, for you to answer those two sort of defenses of what the president did. We do know that not only was Sri Srinivasan floated, Ketanji Brown, a former schoolmate of mine, was also floated, Paul Waterford, who's an African-American judge, and so there were names of people of color who were very seriously considered. Do you accept that rationale that the president has done a really good job of adding diversity to the bench?
Not to the Supreme Court. not when he had those kinds of options, he didn't pick them. Look, I understand, but there's been these lot of defenses of President Obama. Well, look, he's playing chess, other people are playing checkers. No, he's playing checkers, and the Republicans have been beating him over the head with a chessboard for 8 years. And really, he made this decision because he thought, well, maybe Merrick Garland is actually somebody I can get through. If the Republican Party has said, we're not going to talk to anybody that you present, then he had a power within that 1 week window to just appoint someone to the court who would have been there for a year. Hillary Clinton would have done that. George Bush would have done that.
A recess appointment.
Yeah, a recess appointment, yes. Most of the people running for president right now and our previous presidents would have said, you know what, the future of this country's judiciary is more important than petty politics. He had an opportunity to make history. It was completely constitutional, and he gave it up because he was more concerned with trying to look like the bigger man in the room as opposed to the person who's supposed to be commanding this country. That's why it's a disappointment.
And I will have to leave it here, or Merrick Garland is the person that he wanted to nominate. And I think that's something we all have to think about. The president, you know, is thought of as being this very, 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 very liberal person. Maybe he really actually wanted Merrick Garland. That's something we'll have to debate at another time. Kristen Clark, Christopher Kang, Jason Johnson in Washington, D.C., thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. All right, and up next, the shooting.